Hello and welcome to our Lunar Reflections podcast, where we'll be journeying with the moon while Jupiter's in Cancer. Each month we'll release an episode to coincide with the new moon. This month there's a new moon in Virgo on the 22nd of August, 7:06 GMT. I'm Helen. I'm a student astrologer from the UK, practicing a blend of Hellenistic and psychological astrology.
And I'm Tara, a astrologer from the UK.
So I'll briefly introduce some general significations of the moon in Virgo, and Tara and I will talk a bit about some personal connections with Virgo moons. We'll talk about the chart of the new moon itself, and then we both have some charts of famous people with the moon in Virgo to talk about in more depth. We'll end then by talking about some practical ways to work with the new moon in Virgo. So Virgo is a Mercury-ruled earth sign, part of the zodiac concerned with detail, analysis, and organisation. The moon here tends to indicate a strong need to attend to the practical, kind of earthy dimension of life through attention to detail. There's often a tendency to develop practical and technical skills and an analytical understanding of things, how things work. There's often a need to be useful, which often translates into a need to work or to get things done, often in the service of others. The moon also tells us about how we nurture others, and people with Virgo moon will often go to great lengths to do things for those they love, to help them in practical ways. There may be a tendency also for criticism intended to make things better, but which can, depending on the rest of the chart and experiences, etc., sometimes go a bit too far and lead to self-criticism or self-doubt. And Virgo also rules the stomach. So Virgo moons can sometimes be quite diet conscious, maybe even particular. And if they have anxiety, they might be prone to stomach issues. They generally may seek security as well through understanding the physical environment and seeking to bring some order to it. And there can be a tendency also to view emotions through an analytical lens. Tara, what do you think in terms of those general significations? Is there anything that you would like to add or any that you don't agree with?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good summary of Virgo generally. I think you made a really important point around the criticism. What I've found, and I've been a progressed Virgo sun since age 14, so I do feel like I have a little bit of that energy as well. And I've always been really attracted to Virgo energy. And I think you're right, there is this tendency to zoom in and to hyperfixate sometimes, and that can come across as quite critical. But what I've realized is that outside of that criticism of others or other things, there is this very intense self-criticism that can often show up. And I think that's a lot to do with that mercurial kind of element. I think wherever Mercury is, you're going to have that kind of capacity to think, but sometimes it can go, too far in terms of overthinking. It was, Carol Taylor is one of my favorite astrologers, and she says Virgo extracts what is good and makes something useful out of it, which kind of resonates with what you were talking about. And I think usefulness is definitely a word that I would associate with Virgo, and craft and skill. And I think, when we think of Mercury, we do think about our mental processes, the way we think, the way we communicate. But Mercury is also about our hands. And I do find that Virgo are very skillful and good with their hands. And there's a reason why Mercury exalts and is both domicile in this sign. I think you're right, there is an emotional need for structure, very service orientated. I find them to be incredibly thoughtful. And I think that links back to just zooming into those details. Like they'll pick up on those little things that you may perhaps think no one's noticed. And I think that's actually lends itself to as well. There's like a subtlety to them. There's never much fanfare. There's a humility to them, which I love. And because it's the same axes as Pisces, I do see a lot of similarities as well in terms of that self-sacrificing kind of caretakers. I find that they're also very much around healing. And I think you're right in terms of when you spoke about stomach issues and diet, there's all this thing around kind of health and wellness that I kind of relate to Virgos. And, they're the best people to be around if you're not feeling 100% or if you need like a problem solving. So yeah, that's kind of my ideas around Virgo moon.
Great. Yeah, very similar. And also, I was thinking about, as I mentioned at the beginning, you and I both have a Virgo parent, just a coincidence that we share. And I recognize a lot of what we both said from that as well. So,
Hmm.
thinking about, growing up, my dad has a Virgo moon, and I've always had this sense that he'd be there to help me. And but it didn't lead to an excessive sense of reliance and not being able to do things for myself, because it was also balanced by a desire to teach me skills from a young age, both practical skills and critical thinking skills. And my dad's a natural teacher and was a teacher. And so I think that there was that those Virgo traits were quite nicely balanced. And for me as well, it was quite compatible with having my other parent has an earth moon as well. My mum's a Capricorn moon. So there was this sense of groundedness. And with my own moon in Scorpio conjunct their composite moon, I think I was always intuitively understood and felt that I had that safety net. And I think the only other thing I would just add as well is just, high standards, I think, and it does apply probably for Virgos in general, but my dad's not massively easily impressed and wouldn't fake enthusiasm. These are traits that we share. So if he is impressed, it's coming from a genuine place.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it is true. Virgos are very hard to impress and they have such high standards. So if you get any sort of praise from a Virgo, you're like, I always feel like, okay, that's pretty cool. And I think it's so interesting that we have both been raised by a Virgo moon. So my mom is a Virgo moon. And I do want to caveat that misconception around being detail orientated and well organized, because I would say she isn't really either. So it's important. I think it's always important to look at the ruler, Mercury, and my mom's Mercury is debilitated in Sagittarius. And it's actually, I would say, overshadowed by her huge stellium that she has. She has her Sun, Mercury, Mars, MC, and Jupiter all in Sagittarius. So the ruler of her moon is actually squaring her moon as well. So I would say that my mom, while she has this Virgo moon, is much more focused on the bigger picture and more scattered than organized. She is, however, extremely practical, like your dad, and actually she's extremely grounded, and she doesn't have a lot of earth in her chart outside of this, but I think the moon really does help to kind of keep her grounded. She's like the most reserved, humble person you'd ever meet. She's so giving and selfless, but she does overthink and she can get anxious. And, talking about that self-criticism, that can, rear its ugly head occasionally. But, she's been a social worker her whole life and she's an Aquarius rising, and her chart ruler Saturn is in the 12th house, and she goes into prisons. She helps people with addictions. She constantly fights for the underdog. So I see like that Aquarius rising kind of supporting that Virgo mooning, like just constantly giving to others. And it's in the 8th house. So there's definitely that sense of kind of isolation, extreme emotions, there's hidden depths. And I think we've touched upon the Virgo moon can sometimes find it hard to open up and be vulnerable because they see it through the lens of, analyzing in a mercurial way. And I think that's further compounded it being in the 8th house. And then on top of that, she does also have her moon conjunct Pluto. So without going into lots of details, there was definitely a difficult and complex relationship with mother. And so I think when we're looking at these placements, it's always important to look at the ruler, look at the house, and look at the aspects to kind of give you a full picture. But yeah, it's been definitely a part of a chart that I probably need to connect with more. And it's been really great doing this, the kind of prep for this episode, because it's helped me kind of, yeah, understand her moon on a deeper level.
That's lovely, thanks. And I think as well, what you were saying about humility really resonates as well. Humility and service.
Hmm.
My dad worked in public service, and this idea of being of service to others
Hmm.
is a standard kind of Virgo signification, and yet it's been generally shown to be true in what I've experienced.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the the things that I love most about Virgo. That, you know, they're never going to be the one that shouts from the rooftops. That's more like Leo. Hello. But they are always kind of working diligently hard behind the scenes. And yeah, I think there's so much we can learn from that selflessness. And I know that there's also this deep sense of needing to feel needed, which can sometimes kind of cloud like the reason why they're always doing it. But I think it does come from a good place. And yeah, I mean, Virgos are definitely one of my faves. So I'm glad we're here talking about it. And we actually haven't mentioned that we're recording this on the day that Mercury stations direct. So I think that's quite cute because it's like a little nod to the Virgo moon that's coming up.
It is, we've just encountered layers of patterns throughout this project, and that's just so astrological, isn't it? But yeah, as you say, that theme of kind of selflessness with Virgo, and maybe that will be something that we see with the new moon as well. And maybe it would be good to transition into having a think about the chart for the new moon itself at this point. And I don't know what your thought on it, Tara, was, but I could make a couple of general comments on it and then throw over to you in terms of what jumps out at you.
Sounds good.
Um, Great. So yeah, the new moon is at 0 degrees 23, so it's right at the beginning of the sign of Virgo, and this is the first whole sign house, and it would be in the Placidus 12th house. So this new moon is, we can think of it as having just risen above the horizon. And the ruler is Mercury, which is in Leo. As you mentioned, it's stationed direct today as we're recording on the 11th of August. And on the 22nd of August, it will be still only just in its shadow period. So when it gets to 14 degrees, it will be back out of the range that it retrograded through. So that's an interesting point in its cycle when it's just starting to speed up and leave behind this period of retrograde. And Mercury is also having just risen, it's in the 12th house in Leo. And in terms of aspects, a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is the sextile to Mars in Libra, which is in the second house in the UK, where we're looking at the charts. And that could give it some energy, but maybe not super comfortable or straightforward type of energy because Mars is in detriment in Leo in Libra. And then in terms of aspects, the other thing that I wanted to, that leapt out at me anyway, was the yod, which is like an aspect pattern configuration. And it's basically made up of two inconjunct aspects, which are 150 degrees apart. And that's picking up Saturn, Neptune in the early degrees of Aries and Pluto in the early degrees of Aquarius. So the inconjunct's a modern aspect, and in terms of how to interpret it, I think of it as kind of sense of being at odds or discomfort that pushes us to adjust or adapt in some way. If we think about oppositions, the planets still share the same modality. They might be both cardinal or both mutable or both fixed. Whereas in inconjunct aspects, they're almost different in every conceivable way. And there's this sense of being pushed through discomfort to do something slightly different. And when you put these together with two planets in sextile forming inconjuncts to a planet or planets in this case, then this is called a yod aspect pattern, also known as a finger of fate. And the idea is that it can connect us to karmic patterns and fated paths. And in this case, the new moon is connecting us through this uncomfortable set of aspects with that sextile between Saturn, Neptune in Aries and Pluto in Aquarius, which we are representing collective shifts. And it's possible that this new moon in whatever the Virgo sector of our chart is, where we're kind of feeling some edgy kind of discomfort caused by these wider shifts in some way. What do you think, Tat? I mean, the only other thing I wanted to, that jumped out at me was Uranus
Yeah.
on the MC, which has been like a
Mhm.
kind of theme in this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that jumped straight out at me as well. And I think you're right. It's definitely these new moons have kind of a thread kind of link in them all, and it's all of these outers. I think it's not lost on us that this year we've had so many significant ingresses into those outers and they can't really be ignored. I don't know what it is about Uranus, but it's definitely kind of following us around in this podcast. And that was the first thing I saw, like conjunct the MC, making that kind of square to the moon. I do think it could feel disrupted. They could it could feel kind of unsteady at times. And I think the fact that it's at 0 degrees, it's an anaretic degree. We know that we're going to have this Virgo eclipse as well at the 29th degree. So I think that's also really quite important. And what I would say is because this Virgo moon is essentially drawing in the South Node story, that comes into play here. They're co-present by sign rather than degree, but it's still important. Now, the South Node moved into Virgo. It's been there since January 11th. So I would encourage anyone listening to perhaps look at their Virgo house and think about what's been happening there, especially around, because we know that the South Node is often what we need to let go of, what we need to release, what's kind of was in the past, and we need to kind of think about unconscious patterns or cycles of negative behavior that might need to we need to look at. So again, I feel like those themes are going to be pulled in quite strongly with this Virgo moon, especially at 0. It'd be really interesting when we look back to see how that ties into this upcoming Virgo eclipse. But it's interesting, a lot of these new moons at the moment are at the early degrees, and I think you're right in terms of highlighting how they're pulling in these outers and how they're all working together. And obviously there's all the stuff that's happening as a collective, but if we draw down to the personal, just looking at that Virgo and Pisces, both the axes, they don't exist in isolation in terms of what's going on there. And on a personal level, I have Venus in Virgo. So the South Node has been right on top of that, which has been so much fun. But I have actually been reassessing relationships, my sense of self-worth, because the Virgo is my second house. And so, yes, the South Node can feel uncomfortable, but it is something that I think's worth looking at.
That's really insightful, I think, and it gets me thinking about I've got a lot of spirit in the early degrees of Virgo, so although I've got no planets and accustomed to thinking of it that way, it's maybe something about my kind of overall life direction that's being pulled in there, and I'll need
Hmm.
to think about that in relation to the South Node story as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I'm yeah, looking at the eclipses, side eyeing them, but that's for another episode.
Yeah. So I think from there it might be useful to have a think about some of the specific natal charts, and I think they'll pick up some of the themes that we've already been identifying.
Yeah,
So
sounds
if
good.
you're okay, so I think so. If it's okay, I'll kick off. The first one I wanted to talk about is author Douglas Adams and his chart. I'll just introduce him briefly for people who haven't heard of him. He is a cult, how would you say? He's a cult phenomenon, really, and he's the author of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series of books, which were tremendously creative and very innovative, genre breaking science fiction comedy pioneering. And I was very influenced by his books and radio show and TV series from a really young age, from about 10, 12. I was obsessed with his work. So that's why I wanted to talk about his chart. And to introduce his moon, he's got the moon in the third house. So it's in Virgo and it's in third house, it's in its joy. And third house rules communication, short journeys, siblings, extended family. The moon also being inherently changeable and adaptable complements the third house as well as Virgo. And we've got a highly mutable moon then, which is actually ruling the ascendant in Cancer, which is conjunct Uranus. So another Uranus conjunct an angle. I think this, you can't talk about this moon without talking about the sun because it's a full moon, meaning that it's opposite Douglas's Pisces sun. And the full moon signifies culmination. And one of Stephen Forrest's associations with that is art and creativity made manifest. And I think that really fits very well with his incredible creative impulse, thinking about the sun is also in its joy in the ninth house. The ninth house rules publishing, as well as things like long distance communication and philosophy. So it's a really strong configuration for an author to have that full moon across the third house, ninth house axis. And you've got the MCIC axis in there as well, so you can understand that this is really significant in Douglas's life. And both rulers of this axis as well, the Mercury, which rules the moon, and Jupiter, which rules the sun in Pisces, are both placed together in the 10th house, suggesting that they can really collaborate and work together. And obviously, they have done in the sense of Douglas's work. And you just need to think of it in terms of, I think you mentioned craft earlier, craft and skill as a Virgo moon signification. And then with the sun in Pisces, there's this incredible fertile imagination and creativity that comes through in his work. And you can literally see them working together through his creative output, which is fantastic. And as I mentioned as well, the Virgo moon actually rules the ascendant. It's one of the most powerful planets in the chart. And it's then ruled by this 10th house Aries Mercury, which would have supported the kind of bravery of thought and communication, the pioneering nature of his career, and is a career driven by a highly original mind as well. Is there
Yeah.
anything what struck you about Douglas's chart when you had a chance to look at it?
Well, honestly, it's been a joy to look at his chart. I'm not as familiar with his works in that I haven't read any of his books, but I am very much aware of it, and my husband loves all of that, so I think he's got them all on the bookcase. And honestly, I just thought, could you get a more perfect chart for a prolific writer? I don't think so. So
Yeah,
you've touched upon like so many things. I think that full moon is so powerful because the joy of those houses means that that sun and that moon are so supported. And honestly, Uranus so tightly conjunct his ascendant. I think it's almost to the second, really speaks to that kind of like pioneering energy, as well as obviously Aries is very pioneering to have that on the 10th house, to have the rulers there, the rulers of the moon and the sun there. It's so supportive, and I can just see why he was so prolific. He sold more than 15 million copies, I think, of the Galaxy books, which is amazing. And I just wanted to pull out a quote when I was kind of looking him up and kind of reading about him. There's a Neil Gaiman quote, who he kind of credits Douglas Adams as the reason why he writes. So he's been an inspiration and kind of helped other writers kind of be inspired. And so this is the the quote, and it says, "Some brilliantly smart people, but only a tiny handful would I class as geniuses. I would class Douglas because he saw things differently and he was capable of communicating the way he saw things. And once he explained things the way he saw them, it was almost impossible to see them the way you used to see them." And this article was talking about, whether we think Douglas Adams was a genius, and whether he was or wasn't, I did go immediately to that tight Uranus ascendant conjunction because for me it just sparks inspiration, sparks ideas, sparks innovation, and I can just see that kind of Uranian aspect. And then it's lovely because it's ruled by that Virgo moon, which wants all of that kind of creativity through a kind of mercurial lens. And I just love the way that his placements kind of dance around each other and support each other. And it makes sense why he had the career that he did. So yeah, really good chart to look at. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, great. And that's a fantastic quote for illustrating that Uranian nature. And I think the only other thing just to add to all of that is just ruler of the fifth in the fifth. So again, just as if you needed to underscore the creativity dimension of the chart and of his life, you've got that as well. So absolutely fantastic chart. And
Sorry, I just remembered I was going to talk about just really briefly his Saturn Neptune conjunction, just because we're experiencing one now. And while it's quite a wide orb, I just feel that when you've got Saturn and Neptune, you've got that mix of like the fantasy and the illusion, but then you've got that kind of grounded, hardworking, prolific, get stuff done. And so I feel like that also plays a quite a big part in his chart. I just noticed
yeah,
it there in his fourth house. Yeah.
Yeah, that struck me as well. And obviously, as you say, fourth house, so it's kind of opposing and maybe instigating action from those 10th house planets that are ruling the third house, ninth house axis. And I think as well, another signification for Saturn Neptune is kind of world building, and that's
Hmm.
exactly what science fiction and fantasy authors have to do and what one of the things he was a genius at, in my opinion, is that kind of building this whole world. And I think that's making the imagination concrete and perfect for Saturn Neptune significations, isn't it?
Yeah, for definite. And I've just clocked his North Node MC conjunction, again, ruler in the 10th. It was literally his natal promise, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. So I'll just move on to my second, if that's okay, and then we'll move on to your two as well. Tara Parton is the second one that I selected as a Virgo moon. And I think it's another really interesting Virgo moon in itself. So it's at 0 degrees 58. So in fact, it's being picked up very exactly by this new moon. And
Mm.
what I thought was really interesting, well, there's a lot here to say. I mean, also she's got the Uranus on the MC signature that we love on this podcast, and that fits with her. I mean, if you think of her again, this kind of visionary, she's had this great impact in terms of her innovative creative output, and that's in her 10th house of career. But thinking about the moon in Virgo, and it's in some ways, so this would be I think you and I generally use whole sign houses, so and this would be a first house moon in that system. And definitely she's got these characteristics, like when people meet her, she strikes them as kind of full of personality, a big personality, and also very generous and compassionate. These are very strong kind of lunar significations. But I thought it was interesting being so close to the 12th house, the 12th whole sign house, as well as in the 12th house using Placidus in quadrant house systems. And I think it sometimes behaves a bit like a 12th house moon, because I was struck by the anecdote that she goes up to a cabin where she initially grew up. She grew up one of, I think it was 12 children, in quite an
Wow.
impoverished background,
Yes.
very
Yeah.
rural. And now she goes out to be in isolation to write. So a 12th house Virgo moon would almost fit really well with those significations. So I think there's a bit of an element of both in her. And then with the ruler of the that Virgo moon, which again, thinking about craft and skill and being a writer, all works really well. But it's ruled by a fifth house Capricorn Mercury, which is part of our Capricorn stellium in the fifth house. Again, giving us these themes of creativity and hard work as well. She seems to be an incredibly disciplined, and again, prolific is a word you used earlier. I think that comes to mind when it comes to her output. She's written thousands of songs, many for other people to perform as well as for herself, and that those significations kind of come together quite nicely in her chart, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, you've made some really good points. And again, you've chosen a really good chart. I really enjoyed looking at this. And actually, I just want to pick up on your point around the moon getting pulled into the 12th house. I mean, when I first started astrology, I was 100% Placidus, and I've kind of segued into whole sign. So I still have a lot of respect for it. And I do believe that, it's just as valid. So I can see that. And when you were talking about her family, I do remember reading that she said for each new baby that came along, they were assigned an elder sibling to become almost their surrogate mom or parent to help. The older kids basically
Um,
had a baby to look after, and she was given one. Her brother, who sadly did die, and she was only 9, and that kind of sense, and I can just imagine her Virgo moon just taking that responsibility and of motherhood and nourishing, even though she was a child herself. It just made me think of that kind of moon in the 12th house. But yeah, I've got all
mhm.
kind of the similar significations. Like I knew that she'd been really prolific, but it screams in her chart. Like she's 60-year career, 50 albums. And I do think that really, and we keep getting charts with very tight aspects, like her Mars Saturn conjunction in Cancer, I think pulls in that kind of sense of hard work and obviously we know that with Virgo moons, there is this sense of needing to work and almost become a workaholic, and she's a self-confessed total workaholic, and I can see why, because not only do we have that Mars Saturn conjunction, which is just like we're going to get shit done, it's in that opposition to her Sun, Venus and Mercury all in the fifth house. So I think that kind of lends itself to that kind of amount of work that she's done, and she hasn't stopped, has she? So it'll be interesting to see how she experiences this upcoming Virgo new moon, which is going to be exactly her kind of Virgo return. And yeah, Uranus just keeps popping up. So we'll have to maybe think about doing maybe a Uranus special at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I love what you were saying there, because I was looking at some, similar thoughts around, Saturn, Mars in the 11th house. You get this kind of sense of hardworking, and she's also been a very dedicated philanthropist, and thinking about that 11th house can be that broader, social contribution. And there's also almost like a kind of a loop where she's got Saturn is the ruler of Mercury, Mercury rules the moon, and the moon rules Saturn. And it's almost
Hmm.
like these three planets all kind of working together quite well. And I think that's lovely. And what you were saying about her younger sibling, I hadn't realized that, but I thought about her fifth house stellium in relation to there's been quite a lot of media interest in, as there often was in the 20th century and probably still today, if you're a famous woman and you've never had children, the media will outright
Yeah.
ask you why. And
Hmm.
she's talked about it in recent times after I think it was after her husband passed this year. And she said that, they did try at one point, and then it sort of didn't work out, but they felt in retrospect that it was for the best, because she she brings her nurturance to bear on a larger scale, and that's her
Oh,
way of having children. So she has, for example, this imagination library program, which provides free books to children for the first 5 years of their life, which again is a lovely Virgoan and lunar combination channeled through Dolly. And she that started out, I think, in her home state, but spread to 41 states in the US by 2006, and then
wow.
now to the UK, Ireland, Australia, and Canada. So it's almost like she's mothering in a Virgo way on this massive international scale.
Oh, I love that story. I didn't realize that that had happened, and I'm really glad that that's a really nice positive and that she's reconciled that. And I think that's a lovely way to talk around, the difficulties that can arise as a woman who may or may not be able to conceive. And I did read that it was due to her endometrius. She had some gynae trouble, and she ended up having to have a partial hysterectomy, and she did go into a very severe depression after that, knowing that she couldn't have kids. And so I think it's lovely that actually she's been able to be a mother to so many on that scale. And I think that's a really important point that you've made there.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so should I talk about my two?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So yeah, so there's oh, and I actually wanted to talk about, I just wanted to mention really quickly all the different kind of famous Virgo moons there are. So we've obviously got Douglas Adams and Dolly Parton. I know you wanted to do an honorable mention about David Lynch. You can maybe do a little bit at the end if you want, but there's also Serena Williams, Sean Connery, John Travolta, Vanessa Redgrave, Madonna, JFK, Stephen Hawking, Gordon Ramsay, Nicki Minaj, Leo Tolstoy, Paul Gauguin, Donatella Versace, Angela Bassett, Prince Harry. I've kind of gone like with a whole range of different types of people, but those are all our different Virgo moons that we've got. And the two that I wanted to talk about, so the first is Toni Collette, and she's an Australian actress. And I was really happy when I saw that she had a Virgo moon, because I'd love to just talk a little bit about her and why I've just been very captivated by the few performances that I've seen her in. So to start off, she has a Capricorn rising, like yourself. She has a Scorpio sun in the 11th house, and that puts her Virgo moon in the ninth house. And this is ruled by her Sagittarius Mercury, which is in the 12th house, and it's conjunct Neptune. So I first was kind of like made aware of Toni Collette in Hereditary. I loved her in Hereditary. It's an Ari Aster horror film. I'm a bit of an Ari Aster buff, so I've kind of watched more or less all of his films. He did Midsummer, and she was also in a true crime drama called The Staircase, and which is about an American writer played by Colin Firth, accused of murdering his wife, and it was a big true crime kind of phenomenon in America. There's been quite a few documentaries made about it. And honestly, I just found her performance so magnetic. And I think, yes, it probably is her 11th house Scorpio sun. And she's got this interesting 10th house stellium. She's got this very strong Venus Pluto conjunction, which I see as like channeling energy through the arts. And I just think it's really interesting. She doesn't even like horror films apparently, but she starred in one of the scariest ones. Like I don't know if you've watched Hereditary, but
Mhm.
it's very kind of just chilling. And what she is quoted to say about Hereditary is that it isn't just a horror film, it's this kind of beautiful, fragile story about people living with huge amounts of emotional pain. And she's right, even though there was this kind of supernatural element to it, it did talk about the fragility of being human. And I think maybe she excelled in this role because she resonated with that release of emotional pain, which I sometimes see with Virgo moons often suppress their own emotional expression. So maybe subconsciously she might choose these kind of roles so that she can kind of embody it. And actually, as I did a bit more research, many of her roles have been a concerned slash anxious mother. She was also in The Sixth Sense. And I even found an article that was called A Tour Through the Maternal Roles of Toni Collette. And so I hadn't realized that she'd done so many different roles like that. But I think that does lend itself back to that kind of Virgo moon giving, selfless. Like that's everything that you would really want, I guess, in a mother. And I see the parallels with that. And it's interesting because I think she rose to fame as being like the socially awkward Muriel in Muriel's Wedding. And it's not a film I've watched, but again, you do kind of think of socially awkward. Like I can see the Virgo moon. It's like that emoji with like the glasses. I always think that's such a Virgo emoji. Um, but yeah, I'm probably digressing a little bit here. But so yeah, I love Toni Collette and I love her chart. I think it's interesting that she has a ninth house moon. And while she has traveled like all over the world for her work, she has essentially remained in Australia. So I think that kind of sense of security needed from that moon, ruled by that 12th house Mercury, kind of lends itself to that. And I think again, when we're thinking of this Virgo moon and we're looking at where that ruler is, I think tucked away, hidden in the 12th house, I think lends itself to the fact she's recognized for her ability to inhabit diverse characters, again, with that kind of emotional depth and authenticity. And I think that ninth house moon, while it is obviously the house that is around different cultures and widening our perspective on how different people kind of exist, I think that then plays into the roles that she takes. She's spanned a wide range of genres. She's known for taking on roles that require her to inhabit a wide range of accents, physical appearances, and emotional state. She like really takes her time to like craft, and again that word craft comes up. I feel like there's a diligence and a conscientiousness to Virgo moons that means whatever they kind of put their attention to will get the attention it needs. What do you think about the chart?
Yeah, I think again, I think it's a really fascinating one, and agree with everything you're saying there. I think the Virgo moon comes through really strongly in her acting. When I looked her up, I didn't recognize the name until I found out she's was in Muriel's Wedding, which I watched when I was really young. I think it's an incredible film, and the one of the descriptors for her was distinctive versatility, and I think that's an incredibly Virgoan and mutable trait that she because she can transform herself physically and do accents really well. She's got that incredible range, and I think that's really underscored by the ruler Mercury being in Sagittarius, as you said, all the Sagittarian qualities, also a whole sign square, and again, mutability. And I think that those qualities come through really, really, really strongly.
Yeah, and
There's
then once
also,
again, sorry, have you seen her Uranus on the MC?
yes, exactly. That was
Have
actually
you?
the first thing that jumped out.
Sorry, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because I forgot to say it. The Uranus on the MC part of that's the 10th house stellium, so really influential in the chart. The only other thing I was going to add that leapt out at me was this minor grand trine aspect pattern between the moon in Virgo, the sun in Scorpio, as you mentioned, and Jupiter in the first house Capricorn. So there's these kind of combinations of sextiles and trines, and the minor grand trine aspect patterns associated with talent and whatever
Mm.
comes naturally and easily. And I'm thinking both luminaries and Jupiter together in that configuration. And I think that's coming through in her acting work as well.
Oh, that's a really good point that I didn't even pick up. Yeah, that minor, that grand trine, the mini one, does pull in, yeah, the sun, the moon, and Jupiter, and I think that does lend itself to how skilled she is. And I think in true autistic style, I'll probably go down a Toni Collette rabbit hole and probably watch every film she's ever been in. So I probably will watch Muriel's Wedding and just see how, where it all started.
Well, I'll just quickly warn you and any listeners that want to do the same. It is a fantastic, amazing film, but it demonstrates her capacity for pathos. So it's
Hmm.
very, especially if you have a tendency for high levels of empathy, which many neurodivergent people do. Just be warned that there. I think there's as I remember, there's comedy in there, but there's also a lot of kind of harrowing emotions and that just makes me want to mention the overcoming square from Saturn in Gemini, again ruled by Mercury, with the moon. And, maybe that's that capacity she's got to bring in really deep emotions and channel them in an effective way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because Saturn's kind of set apart from all the rest, and you kind of, well, for me, I kind of almost didn't see it, but it is forming that square to her moon. And again, like you said, they're both ruled by that Sagittarius Mercury, and that Sagittarius Mercury is conjunct Neptune. So I think again, you could often see, I think, with those in the arts, Neptune can become quite prominent.
Mm.
So yeah, super interesting. So my final person is Zoe Kravitz, and I didn't actually know lots and lots about her. I obviously knew that she was Lisa Bonet's daughter and Lenny Kravitz's daughter, but I really enjoyed kind of looking at her chart and seeing kind of how that showed up. So she has a Libra rising chart. She has her sun in the third house in Sagittarius, and then she has her moon in the 12th house. And actually, her moon again is ruled by the Sagittarius Mercury, and it's forming a very like it's probably the tightest aspect I've seen. I think it's just 1 second off. So she's got this beautiful Cazimi in the third
Mhm.
house. So again, she's got like this third house influence. And she has synthesia, so she sees colours when she hears music and sounds. And I wondered if that very tight aspect between Mercury and the Sun kind of played into that a little bit. But it was interesting because her mom, Lisa, was originally on The Cosby Show, which I loved growing up. And then they did a spin-off called A Different World, and Lisa Bonet was in A Different World, but she actually got sacked for falling pregnant with Zoe by Lenny Kravitz. And it made me think of this moon in the 12th house because it's conjunct the South Node. And I wondered if because often, when you see these charts and you look at the condition of the moon and the sun, it does give you an idea of what was going on for your parents at the time. And I just thought, I wonder if that kind of signifies that kind of severing that happened early on because of her kind of appearance into the world. She's a known polymath, like Lenny Kravitz, so she's not just a actress, she's a musician, filmmaker, model. And what I found quite interesting was she's been quite open about how uncomfortable she used to be with her heritage as a mixed race woman, obsessed with relaxing her hair. And she's admitted that it took a while to accept and love herself. And I think that's quite brave, first of all, to come out and be that open about it. But it made me think around that self-criticism that we've talked about linked to the Virgo moon. I can see how, especially being in the public eye can be quite difficult. We've already said, in previous episodes, we wouldn't do it because there's just so much kind of spotlight on you. So again, I thought about that Virgo moon and the need to kind of have that introspection away from the spotlight. She says she's quite strategic about the role she takes, and was, you know, concerned around taking race roles that would end up pigeonholing her. And it makes sense that she's being strategic because I do see Mercury and Virgo having that kind of strategic element to it. And Big Little Lies, which is a drama, was multi-layered because her part was actually originally written for a white person. She said that probably helped with the way she could bring a different lens to it. And her big breakthroughs were with Big Little Lies, which has got Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep in, but then also The Batman, which came out in 2022. That those two things kind of firmly launched her into kind of, the A-list of Hollywood. And it was interesting because she's actually one of the most favorite Catwomen, often ranked only second to Michelle Pfeiffer, who's also a Virgo moon. So I thought that was quite interesting. I did try and see if there was a pattern with like people who played Catwoman and Virgos, but kind of got a bit distracted. But I thought that was quite interesting. And then there's stuff around, she's spoken about her anxiety around public appearances and having social anxiety. And actually, she wiped her Instagram after the Met Gala in 2021 because she wore a very sheer mesh dress. And there was a lot of comments negatively that affected her mental health. And I can see the Virgo moon kind of element of her chart, especially tucked away in the 12th house. Well, you've got that South Node. I can see why that kind of happened. And I want to caveat as well that there have been some controversies around Zoe in terms of inappropriate comments and being cancelled. And I think, while it's not an excuse, I do know that having the Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius, especially at such a tight conjunction, there can be a speak first, think later kind of aspect to it. And so, yeah, I just found that really interesting. And then the other thing that I found super interesting was that she also has a Venus Pluto conjunction like Tony. And so it's interesting when you start to look at these charts, just in some way they seem to get kind of threaded together. And what's your thoughts on it?
Again, just a really fantastically interesting chart in person. I agree totally with what you're saying. I think the Virgo moon came through when I looked into her, did a bit of searching. It comes through really strongly. The Again with the polymathic, that was another thing that came up, and we're seeing that versatility of talent again, which makes me think also of another minor grand trine here, which takes in Venus Pluto in the second house and Neptune again, as you were saying, in relation to the last person, often associated with real artistic and creative talent. So we've got those kind of patterns again as well. And I just read one interview with her where I had a sense that she came across as very authentic and straight talking, and that Mercury Cazimi in Sagittarius, where obviously, as you mentioned, Mercury is in detriment, but at the same time, it's right in the heart of the sun, so really close to her identity, and maybe those fused with those themes of authenticity around solar issues. So that coming through really strongly in terms of her being unapologetically herself. And then another quote I thought was really nice was she talked about acting really stresses me out. I like being the director because I'm instinctively more comfortable behind the camera. And then she also added, I love to walk around and be part of the city, but there have been times when I'm like not going to leave my house today because I don't feel emotionally capable of protecting myself energetically from that. And I thought that was a really lovely 12th house moon kind of thing to say.
Mm. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I didn't realize that she'd said that. And it's interesting that she talked about going out into the city and it's like your local environment. And that's, again, that Sun Mercury in the third house, that rootedness of like, where do I belong? And, we've talked about, again, about the moon is about where we feel we belong. And so it makes sense that she's kind of thought that and felt more secure behind the scenes. And maybe she'll continue to do acting and things that kind of put them in the spotlight, but eventually maybe she'll find that she segues more into those filmmaking or, artistic creative things where she can truly be who she wants without feeling the pressure of being famous.
Yeah. And whatever she does, there's definitely a sense of a very talented person, very multi-talented. So I'm sure she'll be successful.
Yeah, definitely. So I've really enjoyed kind of looking at these charts, and hopefully it's been a good way of seeing how those Virgo moons have their general significations, but then you have to zoom out, something Virgo moons don't like doing so much, and looking at the bigger picture and looking at how it all fits with the rest of the chart. So it's been really
Yeah.
interesting looking at that.
So just before we sign off, Tara, as well, you reminded me I was going to mention David Lynch just briefly. And he's another really famous person, incredibly creatively talented as well, who passed away earlier this year. And he's got a Virgo moon that's exactly, or not quite exactly, but conjunct his midheaven. So it's an angular Virgo moon. And I came across just synchronistically at the weekend a repost of a tweet he put out in 2010. He had tweeted on Twitter, "This weekend, I'm going to try and find out if I'm connected to the moon." And then 3 days later,
Oh,
he posted, "I'm pretty sure I'm connected to the moon," which is really lovely lunar kind of connection with him.
oh, that is really nice. That's so cool because I think often, even if you're not into astrology, you can sometimes, especially if you are kind of connected to the moon in that way, and he's got that very tight conjunction with the MC, he must have really felt that presence of it. And I'm noticing that he's got very similar signatures. Yes, him and Dolly Parton were born a day apart.
Yeah, that's why the Mars Saturn and the
Yeah,
Capricorn
because I thought
stellium are
I've seen
familiar.
this. Yeah, I was thinking I've seen this signature before. Interesting.
And as a throwaway remark as well, just that I think that moon is unaspected more or less, so that would make it a very powerful agent in his chart.
That's true. Yeah,
Hmm.
I can't really see it's making really any aspects apart from this MC, which
Yeah,
does make quite a lot of sense as well.
it does.
No, I mean we could be here all day, couldn't we, talking about all
Yeah,
these different charts, but I've really enjoyed it.
yeah, me too. And hopefully, as you said, that will give people listening a more the chance, a less abstract way of connecting with the moon and Virgo through these real charts. And
Hmm.
we said we would wrap up before we finish in thinking about some suggested ways to work with a new moon in Virgo as we're living through this one on the 22nd of August. So I have a couple of ideas and we'll see what you think as well. I thought for me, Virgo energy would work quite well with making lists, bringing a sort of energy of organization and intentionality or working with detail. And because it's an earth sign and in medical astrology rules the stomach, I thought thinking about paying attention to diet and physical self-care could work quite well with the energies. So it might be a good time to try making a list of healthy foods you enjoy eating or trying some rituals that are grounding, like a walk in nature or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think all of that is really good things to think about. My mum loves a list, and I think you can't go wrong with a list. I love lists. I'm always making them. And yeah, I think just connecting back to that kind of self-healing energy. And I would, probably have some candles or some essential oils that's very grounding, especially to
Mhm.
quieten the mind, because obviously the Virgo moon is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury's always trying to do a million and one different things. And so I think having that kind of sense of order, having like a new routine that you can do, but just trying to, yeah, ground and not feel like you always have to be doing stuff. I think, I love how hardworking and selfless Virgo moons can be, and Virgos generally, but sometimes they don't pour enough into themselves and know when to kind of just slow down because there might be, I don't know, guilt associated with not feeling useful or needed. And actually, I'd encourage anyone with those kind of placements or just during this Virgo moon to take a step back and kind of nourish yourself because that's equally as important.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I think just to begin to wrap up, just like to thank everyone for listening. And we really look forward to the next episode, which will be the second new moon in Virgo this month, which is actually an eclipse special. And we're excited to be joined by a guest, astrologer SG Anderson.
Yes, I'm very excited to have SJ on. I think he's an amazing astrologer. I love his takes on things, the way he kind of explains stuff. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everything he has to talk about in terms of these eclipses. They happen twice a year. They are very interesting, especially if you're trying to cycle with the moon. This will be, yeah, an interesting one. So I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Excellent. Well, we hope that you'll join us then. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.